So we'll have a fellows introduction, and instead of introducing them, because they're already going to do this, I just thought about briefly mentioning the fellows who are not here yet. Because Mecila has fellowships from 3 to 9 months, most of them from 6 to 9 months, and some fellows will arrive yet. So I'll just mention their names and briefly what their research is about. So in June, we will receive Benjamin Junge. He's a professor at the NIU University in anthropology. And so he's coming 1st of June, and his project is about navigating precarity, familial friction, class identification, and urban mobility among Brazil's once rising poor. We'll also have, in 1st of July, Miriam Souza. She's a professor of anthropology at UF, Universidade Federal Fluminense, and her project is about conviviality and the afterlife of slavery, experiences of racialized subjects on the move in Brazil. In first in June also, we will receive Stephanie Dennison. She's a professor of Brazilian studies at the University of Leeds in the UK, and her project is about decolonizing Lusophonia, Brazil cinema, and the Black Atlantic. Now in May, we will receive another thematic fellow, namely Jasmin Vrobel. She's a literary scholar at the Ruhr Universität Bochum, and her project is about so close and yet so far, social segregation and racialized topographies in Brazilian comics. Another thematic fellow who will probably arrive in September is Arturo Alvarado. He's a professor at Comex of sociology, and his project is about patterns of spatial segregation, crime, and governance in São Paulo and Mexico City, comparative exploration. And lastly, a fellow who was here yesterday, just visiting, Marco Teixeira. He's an urban narratives fellow who will arrive in August. He's from sociology, has a background in sociology, and his project is about climate crisis, just transition, and narratives of conviviality, inequality in the COP30 happening in Berlin this year. So I'll pass the word now to Chita.
It's a pleasure to be here with my fellows, not just junior and senior fellows. I am Chita, which is tricky to pronounce for Italian speakers. So my mother, among many other things, gave me the name Letizia, as well as she gave me an Italian citizenship and also an Italian familiar context in our house, although we were living in São Paulo, a Brazilian city. This is important for what I am approaching in this brief presentation, and I am going to wrap it up, moving forward the title of my research project here at Mecila. So please stay with me in the next 9 minutes. There are different types of help. You, being from Brazil, I think you know. This was told to me by who I am calling as Violeta. She's a South American trans woman who had done sex work in the past, but was currently taking part in an Italian anti-tratta, which is an anti-trafficking project. On purpose, I'm not specifying her country of origin, nor the city in the northern Italy where she was. Now it's important that she identified a relation between her cultural context and of origin and the Brazilian one. At the time of our conversation, Violeta was living in a shelter with a secret address for victims of trata, which is victims of human trafficking. She was living with other trans women, also migrants from Latin American and West Asian countries. As she said, it's not the first time and won't be the last in which she was in an anti-tratta program in Italy. Violeta loves cooking and taking care of people, even though living with other trans women can be difficult, as she said. In addition to the common problems of living with strangers, the housing project requires them to stay in secret without telling anyone and without receiving visitors for security reasons. There are other rules to continue for the entire duration of the program, which can last 2 years. However, the fundamental rule that cannot be broken, you cannot engage in sex work. Such housing projects is part of an integrated policy of the Italian system called Articolo 18, referred to the legal document Testo Unico Immigrazione, which is considered to be the first anti-trafficking measures in Europe, even before the Palermo Protocol, which was ratified in Italy in 2006. It aims to fight human trafficking for the purposes of labor exploitation, which includes any work, not just sex work, in theory. But in this way, Articolo 18 made it possible to institutionalize and finance a vast network of NGOs and policies that are articulated nationally to offer housing to guarantee the safety of migrants that are considered victims of tratta. At the end of the program, if no employment relations has been established and there has to be a formal labor contract that therefore excludes sex work, it is common for the NGOs themselves to find another Italian city so the victim of tratta can join the program for another period. For this reason, Violeta told me she had been part of these programs over the 20 years that she lived in Italy. Violeta's phrase about types of help is referring to her arrival in Italy, which she considered as a success because she paid once and got there without further taxes. The help for her was given from another migrant, trans woman, already based in Italy, that gave her the possibility to migrate and could eventually make her feel safer and more connected in a network. For Violeta, there are different types of help, and in both cases you have to pay. The difference is that some are actually helpful to reach another country, and some other are considered not fair. These last ones, she told me, you being from Brazil, I think you know, are that kind that you have to always pay new taxes. I therefore agree that highlighting how and understanding why she chose this word ajuda can challenge the formulation of tratta. It is relevant that her comment was said to me only after we did a semi-structured interview for more than 1 hour. We met, we knew each other before from the context of an Italian NGO for trans rights. We met there when I was going to a harm reduction activity in the streets with sex workers. And after a couple of weeks, I asked if she would be available for an interview, highlighting that I was interested in aspects of sex work and migration. But in the interview, she preferred to tell me episodes of sexual violence that she lived in her young life. And just at the end, she said this initial phrase. It was said quickly as we were leaving with the recorder turned off. I've dealt a lot with this dynamic or even requests for me to not write about some information in my academic writings. On that note, are interviews the best methodology to access the complex and criminalized debate about trafficking? How could ethnography be useful to go beyond some dichotomies in this debate? And what are the geopolitical consequences of framing the mobility of Brazilian, mostly trans women and travestis as tratta? So my research is aiming to start from both words, ajuda and tratta, to invest in what I'm calling, ethnographic processes of translation. Based on the notion that translation is an open-ended process, not merely the transposition of meanings, I am insisting to demonstrate the ethnographic dimension of that. I argue that carrying out ethnographic translation processes make it possible to access complexities, ambiguities, and local social movements, as well as promoting dialogical relations between cultural contexts. This process also points to the difficulties in transnational communication when certain terms are not translatable or difficult to understand. In this case, many dimensions of that translation are entangled, but not understanding or validating the notion of ajuda in the ways Violeta intended opens up also an intersectional analysis. With intersectional, I understand looking at local arrangements of power that are necessarily shaped and named differently in each cultural context. Therefore, I point to the impossibilities or possibilities of dialogue between the terms that shape sex work between Brazil and Italy, discussing the transits of people and ideas that are unequally situated in global geopolitics. To conclude, as well as I am starting from both and multiply from the Italian and the Brazilian context, I am also trying to communicate simultaneously with both cultural and political contexts. As I did in my thesis, inspired by the work of Gloria Anzaldúa, as she stated, for a split forked tongue of a serpent is her signal for communicating bilingually. I wrote my thesis in Brazilian Portuguese and Italian. So now I am extending the purpose of transnational debate about sex work, about Brazilian travestis' bodies and epistemologies on the move to Italy. So I will try to write also in English until the end of November here at Mecila. You could say it's megalomaniac, and I agree. Thank you. Oh, no, what's that?
Livia. Hello, everyone. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here among great colleagues and to spend this time in São Paulo. I will speak a little bit about myself, what I have been doing in the past 4 or 5 years, and how that connects to what I'm doing here at Mecila. I am Livia de Souza Lima. I am originally from São Paulo, and I just finished my PhD at the University of Bielefeld in Germany at the Center for Inter-American Studies, where I wrote about Black women in political representation. So more specifically, I wrote about 4 Black women at the Legislative Assembly of Rio de Janeiro and analyzing their representative acts and considering representation as performance. In talking about political representation, which is a topic that I have been working on since my master's, I adopt a constructivist approach to it that can be considered to be formally introduced by Professor Michael Sayward, and that understands representation in something that I consider to be a formula or an equation, in which a representative agent A makes claims B about a certain object C and presents it to an audience D. So more or less thinking about this whole process of political representation. The interesting addition of this framework is actually bringing the importance of the representative agent and its fundamental role in actually formulating ideas about the represented, so either groups or interests, and also thinking about political representation as a process that happens not only within electoral institutions, but also outside of it. So expanding a little bit or a lot the field of vision. So there are many empirical and theoretical implications to it, and what I want to discuss today is how this, some of the implications that I have been reflecting about also have an implication on
what I did and how I'm gonna work with this project at Mecila that I will disclose in a moment. It's not a secret. Um, and in understanding representation as this process, I thought about how we can methodologically approach that. And I thought of that as something that could be approached by three dimensions. So, or actually three starting points. So the first one, and this is not mutually exclusive, or has an order of importance, but the first one would be institutional focus. So thinking about the institution itself, let's say a parliament, or even an NGO, if we're thinking about political representation also outside this electoral frame. The second one would be agent focused, and this is what I did in my PhD. So we're starting from a specific group, so Black women, and then understanding what they do and also how they do it and what kind of topics they are bringing to the table. And then the third one would be object focused, so the focus on the claim. And then, of course, like who makes a claim is always related to the claim and who is making the claim, but then we can access it. So, for example, is studying only what it means to advance an agenda of gender equality, for example. So thinking about that and how this specific topic might be carried out in some specific institution or institutional or a defined group. So finally coming to what I'm doing here, which is some sort of continuation or expansion of my PhD work. I am here to study the newly formed Black Congressional Caucus at the Brazilian Federal Congress, this Bancada Negra, formed in November 2023. And I think that from this three starting points that I am really thinking about a closer relationship between a topic. So I'm still uncertain if we are talking here about only like racial relations in a very broad term, or if we're talking about racial equality. This is also what I mean to find out or to zoom in. And then thinking about how this specific group, so the Black Caucus, how they are treating this. And also very important to this constructivist approach to representation is thinking about these political demands as something that is constantly constructed by the agents. So it will depend on a certain interpretation in a certain context, and that of course can change in different moments in times, but also in different contexts. And then the relationship to Mecila, so thinking about inequality, which is the political spaces of power is always like a space where power relations are unequal in one way or another. So here, of course, I am more concerned with the racial inequalities. But then most importantly, thinking about conviviality as a political category. And the interesting thing, and that I try to insert also in the project, is the fact that the Black Caucus is a super partisan groups. So if we think that politics is always a conflictive process, is always a conflictive relationship, then I presuppose or work with the assumption that working with groups from different ideological orientations, so parties from the left wing, but also from center to the left, to the right, will have other differences that need to be negotiated to form a common front to work with, I don't know yet, but racial equality, or what is this agenda of racial relations that they want to advance. So this is what I want to find out, and of course also what are these conflicts and then how they are negotiated within this room. And then just yesterday when we talked and we reflected a little bit on, or a lot in relationality, I also came to realize that this formula of representation also presents political representation as a relational process that has different actors. So we have the maker of claims at the same time that you have the claim, and you also present that to the audience. So this is something that forms a relationship and a relational process that is also interesting to the connection to Mecila. And then as far as my research goals are concerned, I want to investigate the emergence conditions of this mixed political front, to explore the different understandings that they have about what is to advance a racial equality or racial relations agenda at the National Congress. And I also expect that this specific focus will also make some contributions to political representation theory, but also to methodology. Thank you very much, and I am very excited about that.
So, good afternoon. I'm Wolfram Nitsch. As you can easily see, I'm the senior fellow in this panel. I have been academically trained in literary studies in Munich, and I'm teaching Romance literature at the University of Cologne. And it was in Cologne that I got in contact with Mecila, and I'm very glad about this moment, because now I have the marvelous opportunity for working on a book project in an inspiring interdisciplinary context. In this project converge research interests that were already present in former books I wrote in the last years. The first one is entitled Mécanique évocatrice. I wrote it in French. In English, it would be Evocative Engines. It's a study on the novels of the Nobel Prize winner Claude Simon, a French writer marked by the technical violence of modern wars. And in this book, I tried to read his texts in the perspective of what in France is called cultural technology, an anthropological approach to technical artifacts. One theory very important in this respect was the theory of Leroy-Gourhan, about the exteriorizations of human gestures and competences in technical artifacts. Another theorist very important for me is Bruno Latour, who on the other side stressed the incorporation of technical processes in human beings. So there is always a close mediation and interaction between human and non-human actors. In Claude Simon's work, this is, for example, visible in very huge metaphors that stress these processes of mediation. The second book I would refer to is a book that was translated some years ago into Spanish, a study on Spanish comedies of the Golden Age entitled El Teatro Barroco como Campo de Juego. You will ask, what has this to do with my project? I'll try to explain it. It's a book on plays, on dramas about games that were written in a large number in the 17th century in Spain. Comedies about card games, tournaments, and role-playing too. And I read these texts in the light of the theory of play and games, especially the theories of Roger Caillois and Frederik Buitendijk, a Netherlands theorist, and also in the light of literary aesthetics. And the idea was that in fictional texts, that was what in normal games is temporarily and spatially limited, gets unleashed in a certain sense, so that you have games without limits in fictional texts. That is something you can find very often, for example, in the fiction of a writer like Julio Cortázar. For me, this unleashing of play and games in literature is also a response to discursive strategies who try to make theological or political models of games, training situations, and so on. And I think that literature is freer in its approach to play and games. Now to my Mecila project, which is part of a book that will be entitled Ficciones Vehiculares. I'll try to write it in Spanish. And it's a book on transport scenes in Rioplatensic literature, in literature from Uruguay and Argentina. It was prepared by some former studies I dedicated to technical mobility in the novel, in the work of Cervantes or of Marcel Proust. And some years ago, I got in contact with a research network of Latin America mobility studies created, among others, by Guillermo Giucci. And this inspired me, this project about vehicular fictions. By this concept, I mean fictions that assign a crucial role to means of transports and to zones of transports as streets and roads. And in texts like this, collateral effects of mobility are highlighted. The most important is not to get from one place to another, but that what happens in the meantime, transformation of perception, stimulation of certain emotions like anger or desire. And what is especially interesting for me in the Mecila context are particular forms of interaction in such mobile contact zones. The traffic, in my perspective, is a zone of contact, of interactions, of vehicles and pedestrians, sometimes also of animals. And this is a type of interaction marked strongly by inequality. Already Ivan Illich noted that in modern urban traffic, it's no more a special place that shows social differences, but the differences of speed. And this is often the case also in the literary transport scenes. But on the other hand, there are frequent scenes of conviviality, surprising encounters you can make in such mobile context zones. And this is especially the case in fiction, because fiction prefers extraordinary situations of transport like accidents, traffic jams, long delays, and so on. Well, long delays are no more so exceptional, even in Germany, but it's stressed very strongly in some of these texts. So I'll try to give a first outline on this project in 2 weeks, commenting some texts of the Argentine essay writer and story writer Ezequiel Martinez Estrada, and I will pursue this project as I will stay for 8 months in Sao Paulo, writing on Juan José Sayer, Elvio Gandolfo, and Eugenia Almeida. And I'll be very glad if some of you will be present in 2 weeks for the first round. Thank you very much.